Hello, everyone, and welcome to New Consciousness Review. I'm Miriam Knight, and our guest today is psychotherapist and philosopher Piero Ferrucci, author of The Power of Kindness, Beauty and the Soul, and Inevitable Grace. His newest release is Your Inner Will, which is coming from Tarcher Penguin next week on September 11th. This book explores human resilience and the various facets that compose our concept of the will, and provides concrete lessons in developing internal willpower during times of personal crisis. I am very pleased that he could join us all the way from Italy. Welcome, Piero.
Good morning, everybody.
And it, of course, is evening your time. Anyway, all of us experience periods of despair, fear, and uncertainty, and indeed the whole world seems to be going through a period of global gloom. How can inner will help us to get through this?
Well, will is very, it shapes our life. It's about what decisions we make, how we relate to others, what ideas we want to support and sustain in our life, what orientation we want to have. It's often people think about will as just making an effort. That's not how I think about it. It's more about choice and about getting in touch with the capacity of deciding which way you want to go and to be in charge of the situation.
In reading your book, I was actually impressed at the many different aspects of will that you cover. And it really, so many elements feed into it. It is far from just making simple choices. And I think one of the problems of our society is that we feel so disempowered. And what you are showing in your book are ways to recapture the impulse, the control of your choices, and to make more life-affirming ones. Now, you were very influenced by the work of your teacher and mentor, Roberto Assagioli. Oh, I love that name. The founder of psychosynthesis. Now, could you please just define briefly psychosynthesis? How has it influenced your book, Your Inner Will?
Well, you see, Assagioli was a psychoanalyst in the beginning. That was in the beginning of last century. Freud looked at him as a possible representative of his work in Italy. But then Assagioli that psychoanalysis was not enough, that knowing ourselves is not enough. We have to be able to take decisions, to find our center, to be active in the inner world. And he founded the system which he called psychosynthesis. Mm-hmm. And I met Assagioli already a long time ago, in 1974, when he was, in 1969, died in 74, and he was already quite old. He was, I would say, an old at that time. I came to him because he was interested in expansion of consciousness in transpersonal states of mind, and I wanted to study that. Assagioli was, however, quite gave a lot of importance to the will as well. He thought that was the Cinderella of modern psychology in those times. Now I don't think it is anymore. There are many studies that support the idea that you can train the will, and that the executive function, as sometimes it's called in neuroscience, is basic to our. You cannot will to have certain feelings, for instance. There are some things that the will cannot do, but others that it can, especially if were able to train. So my thought was definitely shaped by psychosynthesis, even thinking, however, that the psychosynthesis is an open system. It's not a closed system that will remain equal to itself forever. My website, in fact, I just came out, was renewed today, and I have in it a section that's called the spheres of Indra. And the god Indra has a paradise which is made of spheres that mirror each other, so that each sphere mirrors all the other spheres and all the reflections of all the other spheres into each other. And I start from that to talk about all the people that have influenced me in my life and that I carry with me. We all carry everybody else that we have known inside of us.
Yes, you actually wrote in your book that we do not have interactions with others. We are made of interactions with others. I really liked that sentence. So how does that composite, how does that, the synthesis of all these interactions relate to our autonomy, for example?
Relate to what, excuse me?
I think you brought it up in the context of autonomy, yes.
Oh, yes. Well, I think I would say there are two basic principles in our life. One is that we want to be individuals, we want to be autonomous, and we want to assert ourselves. At the same time, we realize that we are part of a greater whole, and that we cannot live without relationships, that others, so to speak, are inside us. All the memories, all the interactions, all the thoughts, all that we have been given, whether it was good or bad or so-so, we carry within ourselves. However, if there's too much of being open to others and just relating, we lose ourselves. If there's too much of autonomy, we become like an island. We stop all relationships with others, if that were even possible. So we have to find a balance. We have to get both aspects functioning, and that's what in working with people I look at. Sometimes one aspect is stronger, sometimes the other is stronger, and probably the best thing is to balance the two.
Well, that seems to be a great rule of life, finding that golden mean, finding that balance. Tell us about the relationship between attention and the will.
Tension?
Attention.
Yes. Oh, well, see, there are many different ways of willing, and often we have in mind a will that is somewhat like the Victorian will, that is just forceful, without any attention and without much attention, without much compassion. Imagine, for instance, having to carry a tray with, let's say, a few cups of coffee across a crowd of people, and you have to do it quickly, and maybe they're going to push you, and who knows what's going to happen. We are a bit like that in our life. We are just subject to many influences just at the time when we have to make decisions and we have to do what we have to do. And that is why it's important to find an inner sanctuary, a place in us where we can find ourselves, where we can be conscious and attentive, and even become pure attention, naked attention. And that is, we could call our center or our eye. Now, if we can will, if we can make decisions from that space, that's very, very different than if we make decisions from a place of anger or revenge. That's not the kind of will that we want to make. And so attention is basic. As the Buddha said, attention is the way to immortality, and those who are inattentive, it's as if they were already dead. If it's no attention, there's nobody there.
You also used attention in the sort of law of attraction sense, where that to which you place your attention tends to grow in your life.
Definitely. That is such a basic point to me that it's as if we had a garden and we can water whatever we want in that, let's say, vegetable garden. And if we do it consciously, whatever we give our attention to will grow. In fact, Assagioli, my mentor, was doing experiments in this with flowers. A long time before I met him, I think it was in the 50s. He would give to people 2 sets of flowers, still unopened. And I think they were lilies, because lily maybe is the flower of Florence. And he would ask them to water them equally, but then to give attention, a special attention to one, and no attention to the other, and watch what happened. And inevitably, the one that was given attention, which is equal to actually another level to water the plant, was growing much more. And this is what happens in our inner life. It would be very good to think of what are the aspects, the activities, the relationships, the projects that we want to give our attention, our attitudes as well. We want to give our attention and therefore feed, and all the rest that we don't want to give attention to. And just let it wither away if that is possible. It's not always possible, but I actually see so many people paying intense attention to negative aspects of themselves or dysfunctional aspects of themselves, and in that way they do some kind of reverse therapy. They give energy to everything that they want to get rid of, but it doesn't work that way.
You know, the experiment that Assagioli did with the lilies kind of reminds me of modern parenting, where too many parents feel that if they just give their children the food, the shelter, the education, the material things, without giving them the attention and the love, that they have done their duty. And it seems to me that like the flourishing lily, that the children would do much better with more attention and less material recompense.
How true that is for children and for all other relationships as well. But of course, for children, it's more important because they're more sensitive. They are in the formative years of their lives, and so that's doubly important. It's also important in, I can see it in my work in therapy, and sometimes I teach my students and tell them to just care that they give the best quality of attention to their clients. And that is the main thing. And sometimes they're quite puzzled by that statement. They think they need all kinds of tool and technique, and but it doesn't work that way. And also with children, I know that many parents think that if we give too much attention to children, we spoil them. I don't agree. I think if we give anxious attention, maybe we spoil children. But if we learn to be with them, they will learn to be with us, and they will learn to relate. And attention in this day and age, you mentioned before the times we're living in, there is a great danger of pulverizing attention. I am all for digital means and digital technology, but I can also see the dangers, and I can see people trying to do two things at the same time and interrupting a conversation because they have to look at their cell phones. I'm sure that kind of behavior is ubiquitous, and talking with somebody while they're answering their emails and so on and so on. In this country, actually, I must say, you also see people, even though it's illegal, you see people speaking on the phone while they drive. In fact, I once even saw...
You want to be scared is looking at people text on the phone while they drive.
Well, I once was on the phone with a person that on the car with a person, and the phone rang and he answered, and he was talking, and then another phone rang and he answered the other phone. And I later discovered that one was his lover and one was his wife. I don't know which phone that was, but I took hold of the wheel, and I was a bit concerned. Not for him.
I would be concerned about speaking the wrong message into the wrong phone. Anyway, tell us, we hear a great deal about free will, and there are two camps. There's the camp of free will and the camp of determinism, and you seem to kind of weave your way in between the two in a kind of intermediate position. What is your view of free will?
Well, I think that our subjective experience, you see, I have a philosophical, but then I became a psychotherapist, and that changed things quite a bit, because as a psychotherapist, I accompany people in their everyday life, and I can see what makes them suffer, and I can see what happy, and people are happier when they become responsible for their lives, and when they are in charge, when they are the ones to take decisions, when they are able to carry on their projects, when they are able to not to succumb to other people's will, but if that is needed, to affirm their own will. So I'm quite influenced by that, and I think that the part of somebody's health is psychological health, is discovering or rediscovering and cultivating one's capacity to will, which includes many things, includes making acts of courage, for instance, or sustaining a project through time without being discouraged, and so on and so on. However, here we come to where I weave, as you rightly said, I weave my way between the two. It's also true that at times we have experiences, even major experiences, peak experiences, in which the universe flows through us, that decisions are not taken, but they just happen. And everything that we are just happens effortlessly. And that is a state of grace. That is an absolutely wonderful event when it happens. And we have to recognize it and honor it and give it the space it deserves in human life. And in that, at that time, it's really "Thy will be done." It's as Dante says, in His will, meaning it's God, in God's will. If you believe in God or the Tao, whatever may be your creed, is our peace. And there's this sense of everything effortlessly going on without anybody doing it, which is heavenly. However, that doesn't happen all the time. And then we, after a little while, we again have to land, and we have to pay the bills and drive the kids to school and do whatever needs to be done. And our lives are complex. We are subject to many pressures and to many stimuli. And that's where our is handy. And if we don't have that instrument or that set of instruments, then we may be in trouble. We may start suffering. And, sometimes the way in which I see what the work that needs to be done is by with the will is by looking at an area. We all have areas in our life that are painful, or that are quite work, or that are rusty, or that something is not quite right. And usually it is a matter of will, one way or another. It is a matter of decisions that have to be taken, or of inner strength that has to be cultivated. So again, both things are true. Both things are true. They're just different levels. I think that we can interpret the universe around us in different ways. A little bit like the Rorschach blocks. I can see determinists interpreting what's happening in one way and looking at the blot in one way, and free willers instead seeing the same blot in a different way, but it's still the same blot and it's still the same ink blot.
Well, going back to the notion of attention, or perhaps perception, really, people often feel that they are carried along by circumstance and really don't have choices in a situation. Are the barriers to exercising our free choice primarily internal? Is it a question of fear? You mentioned one experiment that came out with the idea that it's a question of grit. Tell us how we can best kind of marshal our inner reserves and exercise our choices.
Well, I can tell you, of course, the outer world is what it is. Sometimes we have to do what we have to do. We are obliged and constrained by circumstances. But I want to tell you a story that Assagioli, my teacher, told me during the fascist era. He was imprisoned at some point because this was 1938, because he was just a short time before the beginning of the war, and he was in prison because he was leading meditations on peace and internationalism. Can you think in fascist Italy? So they took him to jail, and the first reaction was, of course, despair. It's not pleasant to be in jail. Then he realized that it's true that he was constrained and obliged to be in jail, but he still had the freedom to change his own attitude. In fact, he was going to write a book called Freedom in Jail, and we still have the notes, but he never wrote that book. But the idea is that even in the most constrained of all situations, we can still exercise greed. We can still find some inner freedom, or maybe of inner freedom. And you were talking about grit. There are many studies. There are many studies that, for instance, go and look at people that have been made redundant, who have lost their work, or who are in all kinds of difficulties. And usually there are two series of reactions. One is to resign oneself, to be depressed, be angry, to think that that is inevitable. The other one, instead, is exercising your grit, reading the situation in a different way, reading it as a challenge, as a possibility to evoke all the inner resources that you haven't been able to use yet. And if you look at, there is a study on sport champions, or Olympic champions, for instance, and in the personal story of any champion, you can find times of demise, times of difficulty with their teammates, with the trainer, with their family, with their own body, with whatever. And the idea was that the ones who actually ended up winning the medal were the ones who, not the ones who didn't have problems. In fact, they had them just like everybody else, but they met them in a different spirit. They met them with grit, with courage, with persistence. And they read the whole situation in a completely different way. There are many studies on that. Also, positive psychology that did a lot of study on this subject.
And how does that relate to resilience?
Very much so, because also resilience is a topic that has been studied quite a bit in the past few years, and the point is exactly that. They went and looked at what happened in front of a great catastrophe, like an earthquake, or a war, or a forced emigration. For instance, there was a study on Vietnamese children who had just to emigrate to America without nothing, and they had to adapt to American schools, and they had to learn their ways. There was a study on children, I think it was somewhere in Africa, I think it was in Ethiopia, the children that just had to run away at around 12, 13, because their families had been exterminated, and they just had to survive in the middle of nowhere with lions running around. So people that have been in very dramatic circumstances, and the variety of factors that did it for them, because of course some people succumb and some people instead make it, and the people who make it are the ones who first of all read the situation or experience the situation in a different way. They see it, as I said before, as a challenge. Secondly, they are the people who seek for cooperation and for the help of other people whenever that is possible. They look at practical things to be done, and they give, we were talking about it before, they give more energy and attention to all the positive aspects of their situation, which may be hard to find, but you can still find something in any situation that is at least a little good for you. And they are the ones who make it.
Do you think that this quality of resilience or looking for solutions as opposed to focusing on the problem, is this something that is innate, is part of the existing character, or is it brought out and cultivated by the situation?
I think it's innate, but so many times it's just forgotten. We forget that we have it, especially when we live a life that's easy and has no challenges. Then when the challenge comes, people may be able to connect with that inner strength. In fact, when I lead group on this subject, I often ask people, remember a time when you brought up your inner strength? And they often talk about these times of crisis, and they realize that they do already have this strength. Also, however, there's the third possibility, and that is you can learn and you can teach this strength. You can learn to see yourself in a different way. You can cultivate some qualities. You find in a different way. You can change the concept you have of yourself. You can get more in touch with your own, not just your own inner strength, but all the varieties of the strength and capacities that you already have. You can train your will. You can learn to find your center, which is the part of you that is untouched by difficult times. There's a part of us that is like a sanctuary. It's in happiness and in despair. It remains the same. It's very useful to be in touch with that part of us, because it's there that we can find the sense of our life.
Is that analogous to what some people might call the soul?
Well, recently I saw a thesis of a possible book, in fact, of a colleague of mine, and he found different names. Among which the soul and the self and the Atman and the inner spark and many, many others that were given to it in various cultures. So it has been recognized. Of course, it has been recognized by many people in the different cultures. I would say it's universal, even though these words may be approximate. It's not something that you can measure. It's something that you point to, and when you have the experience, you know it. It's a little bit like when you learn to go on the bike, that you cannot really explain how it is to maintain some kind of balance when you go on the bicycle, but once you get it, you get it, and then you can refer to it again.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Going back to your previous point, I have lived in England for many years, and I was struck by how nostalgic people were about the war years, the World War II years in England, primarily because there was this a feeling of solidarity, feeling of togetherness, of oneness, and also perhaps relating to what you said, people were finding the reserves inside themselves. They were proud of how they coped with the situation, and there was a sense of community and relationship.
That's true. Well, the challenge now is to find the same thing in times of peace.
Indeed.
So we can have both things. I agree with you. I've met, especially in the past, people that thought that those times were in some way cleaner, even though it's nothing that we want to for it to come again. However, it's true that, for instance, in times of war, there are less suicides. And that doesn't make me wish to that come again, but it's something that we have to look at. Why? Why is it so? There are reasons, of course, and they are the reasons that you just mentioned.
Yeah. You you say nothing is more democratic than the will, that it is for everybody. And is it also in every situation, even when we are depressed and at our lowest point? How do we kind of tune into that reserve of will?
Yes, first of all, let me say that it is democratic because there are things, life is not democratic. Some people have a lot of talent and some people don't. And some people are physically beautiful, at least in the sense, and some people are not or are less. And some people are healthy and some people are not. And some people have a lot of money and are born in a rich family, and some people aren't. And will, we may have already quite a bit, or we may not have much, but we can develop it. It's something that if we want it, we can have it. And when we are depressed, of course, it's hard to go and I wouldn't go to a depressed person and tell him, well, now make some act of will and get out of this. Remember, you have inner strength. That is the kind of thing that a depressed person would hate to hear, of course. And depressed people need, first of all, to have empathy and understanding and warmth rather than stimuli. Stimuli and proddings may make them even more depressed. So the idea is to be with them and to empathize with them. However, at some point, they may be able to realize that they can choose, that they can choose attitudes, and if not making an act of will in the physical, they can at least choose which idea to sustain, which quality, which inner quality to give energy to, as we were about before. And maybe even to make a small act of will, like to get up and go for a walk, because already energizing and using one of our functions already makes us feel better. Of course, there are some cases of depression which are too strong and need to be treated in a different way. But the point is, we are living in a society that in a way, our times are wonderful and incredibly interesting and beautiful also. In some way, there's a lot to be worked it. And in some countries, consumptions of chemicals, of medicines to cure depression and anxiety quadrupled in the last 10 years. And I see that in itself is depressed kind of reaction to a difficulty. That's like saying, oh, there's nothing else I can do, so I'll just take a few pills. And that is a sign of that in a way increases our weakness. It's like taking our powerlessness and just bowing to it, and just making it even more so. Mm-hmm. That, I think, is a problem of the era.
I couldn't agree more. It feels like we are giving permission to people to wallow in or to by giving the name to a depression or to it as a disease, that it kind of lifts the responsibility from their shoulder. I mean, if in times of stress, war, natural catastrophe, people pull together and there is less suicide, less depression, and so on, because people are focused on a more primal need of just survival. I'm not for a moment suggesting that people who are depressed, that a proper response is to just say, pull up your bootstraps and get on with it. But we need to help them and help ourselves find our center. You talk about integrity in a number of ways, putting the person back together. Let's focus on integrity for a moment. How do you define that?
Well, integrity is when there is no distance or very little distance between what you believe in, what your principles are, and what you actually do in your life. Often we are double also because we have many brains going working at the same time, and so we believe in some principles. We want to be honest and respectful, and we want to be good people, and different ways, and then we don't do it, and we just deny through our actions all the principles that we hold so sacred. And integrity is a lifetime task, of course, is to bring the two a little bit closer together. I won't say that we can, our principle can perfectly coincide with all our behavior. That sounds a little bit too rigid. But we can go quite a way in that direction.
I'm just wondering if being out of integrity with ourselves is more widespread than we give credit to, and could that be a contributing factor in the rise of anxiety and depression? Definitely yes, and the reason why this is so, I believe, is that our times are predominantly extroverted, much more than other times in human history. Our attention is drawn out there to the outer world, to other people, to stimuli of any kind. There are so many stimuli, outer stimuli, to which we are subjected, that we tend to forget about our own inner world. And if we forget about our inner world, we forget our own values. And if we do,
that then it's much easier to deny them, and then we feel that something is wrong, and we may not even know why. An example of this is, for instance, we haven't talked about a subject that I care a lot also, and that is beauty. I think that we all have a thirst for this wonderful value, for the beauty of nature, for the inner beauty of people, for the beauty of the movement and music and all kinds of arts and so on and so on. But we forget it, and if we don't get enough beauty, then we become depressed, and we may not even know why. It's like heard that when people age, they become less conscious of being thirsty. So we may be thirsty without even knowing it. And our body needs a lot of water and we don't know it. And it's thirsty and we don't know it. And I think the same thing may happen with some values, among which beauty. And we're just thirsty and we need it desperately, but we don't really know it. We cannot put it into words. We're not completely of that. And so we feel lost. We have panic attacks. We feel depressed. We feel irritated or whatever.
I don't want to go without at least mentioning a subject that you actually wrote a book about, which is kindness.
Yes. Well, kindness is love, is warmth, is the capacity to feel affection and gratitude and generosity and loyalty towards other people. That is a wonderful value, and without it we don't function, and it doesn't function. Luckily, I think we're much kinder than we think, because many of us think that the world is, which it undoubtedly is, but it's not only brutal, it's based on the acts of kindness and cooperation and sympathy and help the whole time. And the image that we have, that science has, of a human being has changed dramatically in the last, let's say, 20 or 30 years, that we thought that we were, as it said in Latin, homo homini lupus, a wolf to each. Everybody's a wolf to everybody else. The wolf,
civilization of werewolves, yes.
Yes. Well, wolves actually much kinder. It was thought also, incidentally. It's not so at all. We evolved, we survived in this our magnificent evolution exactly because we're able to empathize and cooperate and feel warmth and express warmth to the people. Said, if we are just a little kinder with other people, we are empowering something that has been part of our evolution for a long time. It's not something unnatural as people used to think.
Piero, our time is just about up, and I did want to ask you, what is your website that you mentioned earlier?
It is very simple. It's my name, Piero Ferrucci, with 2 R and 2 C, and .it.
.it, because you're in Italy.
Exactly.
Right. Piero Ferrucci.it. Okay.
Both in Italian and in in fact, there's one bit that still needs to be translated, but it will be translated shortly.
Very good. A truly international show. Well, we have been speaking with Piero Ferrucci, author of Your Inner Will, Finding Personal Strength in Critical Times. Piero, thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you. It was pleasant, very pleasant. It was a privilege. So I feel honored, and thank you again.
You'll find Piero's book on our website, ncreview.com, along with hundreds of reviews, interviews, and videos. I hope you'll come and visit. Next week, our guest will be James Van Praagh, talking about his new book, Adventures of the Soul. And now we're going to close with our track of the week from Celia Farren. It is the Ho'oponopono prayer set to music. That was Celia Farren singing Ho'oponopono from her album For the Asking. Celia is a singer-songwriter, comedian, and all-around Celtic goddess, and her website is celiaonline.com. Well, that's our show for today, and I hope you'll join us next week. Until then, I'm Miriam Knight for New Consciousness Review. Thank you for listening. Goodbye.